Infants and toddlers display signs of mental health problems? Yes, they can. We're going to be talking about that, and we'll tell you about innovations in addressing the mental health needs of children and their families next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. If you've ever dealt with an inconsolable infant or toddler, then you know that even very young children can show signs of psychological distress. But when does that distress turn into a problem that needs help? Well, lucky for us, I have two experts in the area of infant and early childhood mental health who are here to share their knowledge and explain why early intervention can be life-changing for children. Our phone lines are open for your questions, so call them in now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. We'll be answering your questions throughout the show. Joining me now is Casey Ladd, the Director of Family and Children's Services at the Human Development Center. And Mary Ann Marshall is an Associate Professor in Early Childhood Studies at UMD and an infant mental health specialist. Together, my guests presented a poster at the 14th World Association of Infant Mental Health Congress in Edinburgh, Scotland. That's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome to have both of you here from Scotland to here. Just love that. And I think just a really wonderful place to start, and Casey, we'll have you start with this question, is to define infant mental health, because I think that there are a lot of people out there who, when we say infant mental health, they're thinking, what are they talking about? So the definition of infant mental health.
And Carolyn, as I've said to you, and Marianne, I've said this to you too, that in 2005, I was one of those people saying, what? Infant mental health. So the definition that we use is from the organization that's a national organization, DC 0 to 3, and when we look at defining infant mental health, we're looking at the baby's capacity to first regulate, express their needs and feelings, that we look at how they're able to do that in relationship to an available caregiver. The third thing that we look for is the ability of the baby to explore their environment, which requires safety, and that we're trying to understand how this takes place in the context of their family, their community, their culture. So those are the kind of the four aspects that we look for.
And I think you had explained it once to me, Casey, that one aspect of that, how they can engage the caregiver is, how can I make you fall in love with me?
Yes.
The baby's capacity to make you fall in love with,
yes.
with the baby, which I think is such a wonderful phrasing of that. If that's infant mental health, what would we say is normal?
Just that, I think, the baby's ability to make their parents fall in love with them. And, you know, it's really the capacity or the ability that babies have to send signals, as Casey was talking about their needs, their feelings. And then it's a dance, really. So how then, if the baby is sending signals that are readable, how does the caregiver kind of read those and then respond in a way that is meeting the needs of the baby?
So you started off then, Marianne, by saying if the baby sends signals that are readable, and when you say, when I hear then that sometimes maybe the miss can be a baby's inability to send readable signals. Is that part of that?
Certainly is, yes. And sometimes it's because maybe it's a mismatch between caregiver reading and baby signals. You know, I think it's almost like it's a thing, it's an activity that has to be practiced again and again so that baby learns how to use caregivers to get signals, and caregivers know how to read that. And that takes time to practice, and they talk about attunement, being attuned to one another. And for some babies and for some caregivers, that's easier than others.
And so sometimes we're looking at that the difficulty with that sometimes lies in the baby. You know, so when we have a baby that we've talked about that maybe is colicky,
Yes.
they're very fussy, they're difficult to console. And some parents have more ability, more patience, more support to be able to kind of, you know, handle that.
Manage that, weather that.
Right. And then we have some relationships that get very, very distressed. And we're oftentimes hearing those stories of distress from our colleagues who are pediatricians or family docs, and that we have some wonderful colleagues who are recognizing some of that early distress in that relationship.
What are some of the caregiver's attributes that maybe interfere with the sort of effective right-on reading of a baby's signals?
We would see very much that some caregivers come in with an expectation about what this experience is going to be like, what I'm going to be like as a mom, what I'm going to be like as a dad, and they find the experience is very distressing. This isn't what I expected at all. That we'll sometimes see, and I know that we had Dr. LaRusso on your show a couple months ago talking about the postpartum depression. That certainly is one of the issues that we see can be very big interference with being able to enjoy the baby or to read the baby's signals.
Or even maybe to give the baby signals that you're interested in,
Yes,
in the baby. If we think about what depressed people look like, I know when I was in graduate school being trained, a professor of mine said, you'll know the depressed person in your waiting room. They look sad. And so if you have a sad, slow to respond caregiver to a baby, a baby's going to pick up on that, is what you're telling us then.
And that was actually one of the earliest referrals that I had, was of a 10-week-old whose mom was really struggling with depression, and the baby was distressed. And one of the things I noticed right away is this baby was not making eye contact, and the baby was looking all around the room, and that when I looked at mom's face, I could kind of think like that the face did not look inviting, and it looked kind of distressed and almost angry. And so we had to teach the mom that at least for a while, until she started to feel better, that she had to fake it, and she had to fake looking kind of like happy and pleased and delighted in the baby. And we saw them a week later, and the baby and the mom were beginning to alter a pattern that already had started getting off track. And we also brought in some other family members who could support the mom and help the mom until the mom started feeling better.
I think that what's so incredible just about what you're saying is how, we always talk about relationships are reciprocal. And I think when we talk about that phrase, relationships are reciprocal, we're generally talking about older people together. We're not talking, but what this information really is about, the reciprocity in a relationship starts like in the beginning of the beginning with that.
And absolutely, and so a lot of times it's talked about as serve and return, the ability for partners to serve the engagement cue, and then for the person receiving it to send it back. So it becomes this finely tuned dance. And I think the powerful thing to really keep in mind in all of this is that babies come into the world wired to connect, and they will go at great lengths to figure out how to do that with caregivers. And that is, I think, so a lot can go wrong, and there's a lot of room to go wrong. It just has to be good enough, because as a parent, you can't possibly read all the cues that babies give you in a 5-minute span. But if you can read enough of them so that they feel a sense of predictability, wonderful. And the other piece of that is that through the unsuccessful recruits for attention comes the opportunity for repair. And with that repair comes a deeper and I think more, what would the word be? I guess richer relationship. You know, that we learn that, yep, it didn't work this time, but I can fix it and try again.
And that gives a parent a sense of competence then.
Exactly. And babies.
Here's a wonderful question, and that was really sort of speaks to your statement about parents, and especially new parents, coming to the relationship with this expectations, and sometimes almost with this expectations that they want to sort of lay onto the baby of, this is what I imagined you would be like, and this is how you're going to be like. And so this caller calls in to say, first-time parents worried about doing the right thing for the baby, what are some of your best tips for new parents?
The best tips for new parents? Well, ideally, you know, is to have to have a community of people who are supporting you in this new role. You know, so to really be able to access and reach out. That we also, I think that it is encouraging the parent to pay attention to, you know, what is happening inside of them. That, you know, to be aware of what's happening well, but also where there's, you know, some of the distress, and, you know, to get input from people who have some experience. And these are not necessarily professionals, because, you know, 120 years ago we didn't have, you know, mental health people to go consult. That you had the wise people that were kind of like in the family system. But the baby is, what we will say is that the baby is just hungry for and starving for that eye contact. And so we would even just say that talking to and looking directly at the baby has a great tolerance for doing that for a long time. And, you know, that again, to take the time to be able to do that, knowing that as we do that, the baby's brain is really starting to, you know, I have a niece who's a neurobiologist, and she said it's kind of like the baby comes with twice as many neurons at birth as they'll have at age 10. That half of the neurons that we're born with, that if they don't get used and fired, they kind of get, it's called pruning. And so it's such a rich time, and the way that the baby and the infant and the toddler, that their brains are getting kind of wired, is through this very attentive, focused relationship. Marianne, I don't know how you would answer that.
Same way. I think I might also add that, you know, that there are multiple experiences during which the brain is wired. And what we do know is we have so much evidence now that really strongly supports the idea that early relationships wire the brain, and the absence of those can be detrimental and have long-term impact.
You know, so we're talking about this whole notion, I always go back to that phrase, it takes a village. And, you know, Casey, what you said is gather your village. That was sort of top tip number one, gather your village. And you know, you're talking about that babies can sit and stare at you for a long period of time. And if you get weary of the staring, put somebody else from your village in there to connect, so that the baby's getting the stimulation and building connections with people, not just a single person,
Exactly.
but with people. How do we know when things are going wrong in an infant? How do we tell, Marianne, when an infant is suffering? Because they cry about everything, you know, so right. I'm hungry,
so
I'm
how much
wet.
is too much, right? Yeah. And I think that parents really sometimes have this intuitive power more than anyone else to know. Many parents I've worked with have told me that they just feel something isn't right. Maybe it's that there is a lack of responsiveness to a lot of attempts by parents to connect with baby. You know, I think about children who are perhaps end up with a label of being on the autism spectrum. That there is, in fact, recently I was at a workshop in which a gentleman was talking about the research he was doing in which they were looking at where baby's eye gaze is. So they have these high-tech cameras, you know, that can measure milliseconds of where the baby's eye gaze is. And so eye gaze tells us a lot. And in children who are, you know, engaging and able to use their caregiver as a way to calm or regulate or connect with, they look right in the eye. But in kids who ended up being diagnosed as having autism later on in their lives, like I think 24 months, their eye gaze was not in the eye. It was like at the chin, in the forehead, etc. So I think eye gaze is a really important thing to think about.
And in fact, this question that I'm looking at here says, are there any obvious signs of autism during the infant stages? And that is what the research is showing is one of the signs is eye gaze. And maybe even if the infant, you would imagine what we know about autism, if the infant even prefers to look at a person versus looking at other things.
Yeah.
And I think that also that we're looking at babies who are in so much distress, or that they have the inability to relax and to experience and express pleasure. They have difficulty taking in or responding to a smile, silliness, and so that that they don't seem to be having that capacity very well to kind of, and because that's when we talk about that a baby's job is to make us fall in love with them, that there are some babies who are not, doing that. Heather Weinstedt, who's our good friend who's a pediatrician, says that she can tell oftentimes at the 2-month well child check. And it's looking at that the relationship's in trouble, that you have a parent who's saying, this is very distressing, this is not what I thought, but that she could also see that there's a baby who seems not to be responding. And so we can't emphasize enough about how important it is to work with your pediatricians and your family doctors, because they're seeing,
they see a lot of babies.
And so they are really so important in terms of being able to recognize. And in our Duluth community, our family docs and our pediatricians are doing some wonderful early screenings in terms of normal development and then normal social emotional development. But Heather said to me, Casey, I can see the troubled relationships. I just can't get them to see anybody until the babies are now 3 and 4 and getting kicked out of preschool, or that they're just, it's more than the terrible twos. And the family is really experiencing now a tremendous amount of distress because the baby's needs and demands are at such a heightened level that now we're beginning to have parents who are not only enjoying the children, but who really can experience anger, frustration, irritation. And if that irritated little child happens to be in a family where parents have mental health issues or substance abuse issues, now we can be talking about a baby who is in danger, or a toddler who's in danger, because the adults are so challenged with their own issues that they can't respond to the infant.
So one of the take-home messages that I got from some of what you were just saying is, we think about that babies have a lot of these little wellness checks, but they're really important because your pediatrician has seen thousands of babies.
That's right.
And so they develop such that same almost intuitive sense as a parent does about what normal looks like and what normal doesn't look like. And that can be a great safety net for saying, I think we need something more here. Let's talk about what are we doing to nip this problem in the bud early so that it's not getting to the 2 or 3 or 4 or 10-year-old mark. What are what is the treatment that you would, the innovations in treatment, I think, because to me it's just very, very innovating for parents and infants then.
Yeah. So I think this is an area that we in the past decade have come miles. you know, it used to be, one of my first jobs was that I was an early interventionist working with birth to 3-year-olds in rural parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota who were diagnosed as having a disability. So that, at that point in time, was pretty much your child had to have a diagnosed disability to get services. Since that time, there have been a myriad of programs that have been developed focusing really on the relationship and building the capacity of the parent to really do some of the heavy lifting, which is often the case if you have a child who has communicative, interactive kinds of issues. And so there are many programs that really look to just really nourish and feed that dance that we've been talking about so far. And so there's a number of programs that are run through public health, nurse-family partnership through county health services. There is early Head Start, which I understand one of the districts in the area, I think it's the Arrowhead district, just received an early Head Start grant to start doing visiting. I mean, many of them are home visiting based, that build the capacity of the parent to be with the child and to read the child's signals that can often be rather difficult. There's programs that look specifically at families who've experienced trauma or who've experienced just very difficult things that are more, perhaps that involve more training on the part of the interventionist, that have been found to be very effective. The evidence supports their use, have seen changes in both the well-being of the child and the well-being of the parent-child relationship.
And Carolyn, I think that as you know, that at HTC, that we have been trained through some wonderful grant money from the Department of Human Services to train a number of our staff who are specifically trained to do the diagnostic work of birth up to age 5-year-olds, as well as to pay attention to the adults that we're serving at HDC who might really be struggling with their mental health issues, and no longer ignoring the fact that those adult clients are parenting birth to 5-year-olds. And so we're offering some specific programming both with the child as the client, as well as with the parent as the client. And it's all focused on treating the relationship.
And I think, you know, a question here, this particular caller asks the question of, well, how would I access care for my infant? Would I go through my pediatrician, or would I go straight to a mental health care provider? And it sounds like the answer really could be both.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That you can make that individual decision as to what you want the starting point to be. And it also sounds like, Mary Ann, you would say, if your hunch is that there's something wrong, number one, check it out.
Exactly.
And don't stop until you feel like you have an answer that's satisfying to you.
Right. And so, you know, Help Me Grow is our state. The state of Minnesota has just put forth what's called a national Help Me Grow effort, in which people from across disciplines who would help young children and families during birth to 3, during the ages of birth to 3, there will be a one point of contact. It's in the development stages right now, but where families would call to figure out, you know, I'm having these concerns about my child's feeding or about my child's motor development. Who's out there who I can go see? So it would be like a point of referral, a one kind of a touch point that parents would be able to call.
And I think that is the perfect note to end on, because we're already done. We're already done on this pre-holiday show. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. And on this show, we talk a lot about the power of connectedness, right? And what did you hear? What did you hear Mary Ann and Casey talk about how vital connectedness is, about how we are hardwired to connect to other human beings, and how important it is to our well-being and happiness from birth. From birth. But don't just accept my word for it. Go to YouTube and search Tronic Still Face Experiment. We have a graphic up, and I'll post that on my blog. See for yourself. In a world overrun by superlatives, this video clip truly is amazing, and it will help you to understand the importance of connectedness, not just something that we talk about. It will help you understand it in your heart. And since you'll already be on the web, after you've watched the video, slide on over to speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links and read my blog, the place where I answer more of your questions. Now, we're going to be taking a holiday break for the next 2 weeks. So in the spirit of Oprah, I'm going to share with you one of my favorite things. It's a free tip. It's a free tip because we do not have her budget. This is public television after all. So here's my free tip. Instead of just buying presents, take the opportunity that the holidays give all of us to be present. Then make sure you're present with us for our next show on Thursday, January 8th, when we'll be talking about coping with seizures. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching, and good night.